All right. All right. So actually, what I want to talk about is what we just chanted, the Dharma Talk verse. Maybe zoom in a little bit more so we don't get the back of Aiden's head and half of Mari. Maybe we'll still get those things. Okay, cool. Okay, anyway. There we are. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your patience when part one went smoothly and then part two. So it's really been fun, and a couple people have told me that it's seemed helpful to dig into these little verses that just sort of fly by. And even if you've chanted them 100 times, still, that just means they flew by 100 times, right? And these have some deep roots, these little chants. They were all written 1,000+ years ago. They're all composed in Chinese, oftentimes referencing earlier Sanskrit or even Pali or Gandharan materials, but preserved in Chinese. And chanted one way by the Chinese chant practitioners, and with different voicing, but the same source, looking at the same characters by the Japanese Zen practitioners. So this one that we just chanted, in English we chant, an unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. So in Chinese it's 4 lines, each line with 7 characters, and it's useful to have your chant book open too, and refer to it from time to time. There on page 2 probably. So the first line is pretty interesting. In Sino-Japanese it sounds like this: Mujo Jinjin Mimyo no Ho. Mujo Jinjin Mimyo no Ho. Mujo means unsurpassed, like not above, like the best. So it's the famous character Mu, like, the dog doesn't have Buddha nature, Mu, and then the character that means above, so not above, unsurpassed. The Jinjin is actually 2 different characters, so this is a little bit hard when you're hearing these things orally only, even if you knew the stuff left, right, and center, is because Japanese has a fairly limited number of sounds. Chinese has a lot more sounds. So there's so many interesting stories of language in this tradition. And so these are 2 totally different characters. One, the first jin means deep, and the second jin means profound or subtle. So deep and profound, deep and subtle. So it's so far we have unsurpassed, deep and profound, and then the next one, myo, means mysterious. So this is mysterious, what we're doing here. Something beyond. And then the last character there, ho, is dharma. So unsurpassed or not above, deep, profound, mysterious dharma. So what we would never in a million years know, though, and that's all seems pretty sensible and it fits the English pretty well, right? But we would never know in a million years is the last 5 of those 7 characters are lifted straight from the Lotus Sutra, really important text in Mahayana Buddhism, with all these wild stories and very colorful and interesting. Several of us have studied this, and it'll come around again if you haven't yet. It's worth knowing about. It's like the science fiction of our tradition. Wild things happen, and unbelievable special effects are required to make sense of the sutra. And so anyway, the most of this first line, Jin Jin Mimyo no Ho, is from the 2nd chapter of the Lotus Sutra. And what's happening in the 2nd chapter is after the blowout movie opening, and it does have a blowout movie opening, In the opening scene in chapter 1, there's this long description of this scene. It's all about this one scene. We're on top of a mountain. Buddha's on kind of a high seat in deep meditation, surrounded by thousands and thousands of incredible beings, all different kinds of bodhisattvas and even non-human creatures of all kinds. There's a long list of them, mythical creatures, we would say, and monks and nuns and lay people, male, female, and I'm sure non-binary. Oh, it doesn't say that in the text. Are there just entranced and amazed that they all get to be there and they all get to bear witness to this teaching by the Buddha. And they're also really curious because the Buddha's not saying anything, but he's in this incredibly moving deep meditation, so they all drop into the deep meditation too. And then this light emanates from the Buddha's forehead that isn't just this incredible, beautiful, warm light that goes everywhere. It goes not just everywhere, but through multiple universes in all worlds, So you can imagine the filmmakers in Hollywood, what fun they would have with this. Maybe they'll make a Lotus Sutra movie. I hope so. And so the whole first chapter is just getting us in this scene, And when I teach the sutra, I try to lead a meditation, try to imagine us into the scene, and there's a video of that on the website somewhere. But by the end of that scene, the bodhisattvas are getting curious, like, what does this teaching mean? This is amazing. I'm so glad I'm here. Oh my God, dude, right? That definitely says that. But then they discuss among themselves. Somebody should ask the Buddha what the meaning of this is, and eventually there's a whole process, and Manjushri asks, and the chapter 2 is the Buddha answering. So that's where this line is quoted from, is the Buddha's answer in chapter 2, and about a couple stanzas into a long poem of his answer. So here's his answer, and you'll hear the profound, subtle Dharma towards the end of this quote. So this is the Buddha kind of talking self-referentially too, so which is kind of cute. The Buddha says to the huge assembly, having witnessed this miraculous meditation, "The hero of the world is unfathomable." Unfathomable meaning can't be measured. "Among heavenly beings or the people of the world, among all living beings, none can understand the Buddha. The Buddha's power, fearlessness, emancipation, and samadhis, concentration states, and the Buddha's other attributes no one can reckon or fathom. Earlier, under the guidance of countless Buddhas, he fully acquired and practiced in various ways the profound, subtle, and wonderful doctrines of the Dharma that are hard to see and hard to understand." So it's that end part. So the English is pretty different, right? And so that's why it's a little hard to trace these things back in translation. But in the original Chinese, it lines up. There's this particular set of 5 characters in a row. So it's almost certainly a quote from the Lotus Sutra. And then it goes on for many, many pages about how Shakyamuni Buddha didn't just do a really great job. The being Siddhartha Gautama, who became Shakyamuni Buddha, our Buddha. Shakyamuni is sage of the Shakya family, which he was, from the family called the Shakyas. Muni means sage. Anyway, he didn't just do a great job in his practice and go to the temple every week and do lots of meditation. It was a much longer and vaster project than that. So this sutra is introducing us to these ideas, introducing the Buddhists of the day to these ideas, that this thing happens over a much more cosmic scale. And as he said in the little quotation there, it's not easy to understand the Dharma. It's subtle, it's mysterious, it's unsurpassable, it's inconceivable, literally. How do you understand something that cannot be conceived? Well, you practice for many, many lifetimes with many previous Buddhas, and you do lots of really virtuous things, and there's a huge literature of stories about all the things that happened, Sacrifices made and important things learned and incredible events that happened until, zillions of lifetimes later, the Buddha appears. So that's all standing behind this first line, It's not just a throwaway thing like, oh, this Dharma's kind of cool, hard to understand. Good thing you're going to hear a Dharma talk now, Much bigger thing is going on. Isn't that wild? Who knew? Huh? Who knew? And I learned this partly through reviewing Shiohako Okamura's book called Living by Vow. But he doesn't really go through every line and translate it, so I'm trying to go even further than he did in that little book. But he turned me on to the Lotus Sutra reference, and then I found it in the sutra. So anyway, if you're the one up here giving the talk, it was already bad enough. And Ken had to do this just the other day. That's why he's laughing, you know. Luckily we didn't kick him out, you know, and he didn't. Or whatever. You know, not only are we saying before the Dharma talk every single time, this is an incredibly difficult thing to understand, but now I'm going to explain it to you. Now we know it's not just like honoring the Dharma, it's talking about the Buddha's practice through inconceivable numbers of lifetimes, you know. It's much bigger than anything we can imagine. So if I'm paying attention, it's a little intimidating to chant this, you know. Like, how am I supposed to explain anything that like this that couldn't ever be explained? What an insane situation. And then I often remember one time my teacher, Norman Fisher, described having that feeling. And he gives a lot of talks, you know, many thousands. I'm in the multi-hundreds probably, but not thousands. But one day he said he realized that actually it's okay. Because the Dharma actually is everywhere and everything at the same time. So it's both celestial, mysterious, you know, obscure, arcane, hard to understand, and it's right here, you know, right now. It's a big part of the Zen tradition's realizations and sharings, right? Yes, it's hard to understand, but it's right here. You already understood it. And there's nothing to understand, you know. And that's why you understand it. So it's okay, actually. And this is actually in the language also, because in English we distinguish two different dharmas with capitalization, which is not in the Chinese. They don't have capitalization. Capital D Dharma means the teachings, so the teachings of Buddhism or of the Buddha. And lowercase d Dharma means reality. So the teachings to help us to understand reality, but the reality is just the reality. And so everything I say, or you say, or Ken said, or any of us can say, is absolutely the reality of us saying them, is absolutely the Dharma in that moment. It's exactly what's happening in that moment, so it's the Dharma. So we don't have to worry too much. We don't have to be perfect, because reality is already perfect. So that's all baked into the first line. An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is what we're doing here. So next line. Oops, I lost track of where I was. Sorry. It's much harder on the phone. Oh yeah, okay, the second line sounds like this. I don't know why I want to share these sounds with you, but I think it's fun, so I'm going to. Hyaku senman go nanso gu. Hyaku senman go nanso gu. And here, if we just took each word and translated it, so a literal series of words that matches those words, which isn't quite a sentence, but isn't too far, is like this. 100, 1,000, 10,000 kalpas, 10,000 kalpas. So 100 is one character, 1,000 is another, 10,000 is the third. Fourth one is actually fourth and fifth together. No, just the fourth one. Sorry, just the fourth one is kalpas. I'll explain that in a minute. Fifth one is difficult. Sixth one is to come across. And the seventh one is meet. So 100, 1,000, 10,000 kalpas, difficult to come across, meet. So R is rarely met with. Even 100,000 million kalpas is actually just fine. The word order is totally different, right? You know, where you put the verbs and where you put the nouns and the adjectives is going to vary between different languages. But so it's our translation is quite literal. That this Dharma is rarely met with even in 100,000 million kalpas. 100,000 million kalpas, difficult to come across, meet. You know. So what's a kalpa? It's a really, really long time. So not only is this really hard to understand, but even if you keep trying for a really, really long time, it's still hard to understand. I've heard many definitions of a kalpa, and they're all kind of poetic. And here's another one for the collection. Imagine that a storehouse with a capacity of 10 cubic miles, it's a big building, is filled with poppy seeds. And once every century, you getting the idea? Once every century, someone removes a single poppy seed, puts it somewhere. There's a lot of them. I don't know where they put them, but they put it somewhere. A kalpa is defined as the time it takes to empty the storehouse. It's a really long time, right? It's a lot of poppy seeds. And 10 cubic miles, that'd be 10 cubed, right? So 10,000 cubic miles. And we're talking about an awful lot of practice and study to understand the Dharma. So yeah, we're pretty close to the Chinese still here. An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with even in 100,000 million kalpas. So now the third line, which in Sino-Japanese sounds like Gakon Kenmon Toku Juji. Gakon Kenmon Toku Juji. And here, if we again did a very literal this word, 7 words in a row, we would have I, like me, I now know or understand, hear, am satisfied, receive or accept, sustain or hold. I now know, understand, hear, am satisfied, receive, accept, sustain or hold. So our having it to see and listen to, remember and accept is pretty good, but there's a couple of things missing there. The second character, number 2 there, sounds like kon in Sino-Japanese, means right now, right now. So we don't have the word now in here, but it's implied by having, so that's okay. One thing that's kind of fun about that second character, the character for now, is that it's half of the character nin that we looked at some weeks ago when we were looking at the Enmei-Juku Kannon-gyo. The character nin, which means mindfulness or affinity. Nen, not nin, sorry, nen. Nen, this nen, that nen, that nen. Remember all those nens? So it has like the top part is now, and the bottom part is heart. So this is just the now part. So I now know, understand, hear, have received, sustain, hold this. So the I actually gets, we move the I to the 4th line in English, but this now thing is actually pretty significant because it just contradicted the first half of the chant. First we had incredibly subtle and profound, it's going to take 100 million, thousand, gazillion kalpas, and then we say, now I understand it. So it's like this incredible holding of opposites. This thing is vast and subtle and mysterious and empty and beyond any conceptual anything. And it's right here and now, right? You already knew it all along. Kind of like that feeling of, coming home again after a long trip. Like, oh yeah, I'm home, right? And I think the Dharma is really about that experience of coming home. So our chant tells us that we had it all along, even though it's subtle and mysterious. So this is a really interesting part of, I think, Buddhist understanding. There's always these 2 aspects to everything, And if we land just on one side or the other, we're kind of in trouble. We're very incomplete. So we have to be willing to be uncomfortable, I think, because our conceptual minds are made uncomfortable by A and B are both true, right? It's supposed to be A or B. Maybe you can be both if you make a C, but if there's still A and B there, it's like, what? So A and B have a deep truth. So here, with this little duality, apparent duality, and it's made whole by the way we hold it, right? So the practitioner's job is to hold the duality so that then they're free from duality, right? That's why we have 2 hands. And that's also why this gesture was invented, right? So this is putting those 2 hands together, right? Exactly. So one whole, 2 hands. So with this, in this case, if we only had, oh, this stuff's really hard to understand. You know, the teacher maybe understands it, maybe not. I'm not quite sure about that part, but I know I'll never understand it. It's too subtle. It's too complicated. I started too late. I'm never going to learn Chinese or Sanskrit. You know, right, on and on. Like it's, I'll just sit here, but I don't know anything, you know. So that's not quite right, you know. That's a little too limited to feel like you're never going to understand. But it'd also be wrong to say, oh, yeah, there's nothing to it, you know. Just breathe. This is not complicated, people, you know. Why do they have all these books? What's the point of the Dharma Talks anyway? Like, it's just this. Just breathe, you know. Just presence. Like, that's not quite it either, right? That's missing a whole lot as well. So it's actually somehow both, right? Both subtle and endless learning. We're always going to be learning more and unlearning and relearning, and there's so much to know, and all of it's important. And it's fine, you know. There's no lack here. In other words, there's no lack. There's nothing wrong with our understanding or our non-understanding. So I think that's a really important part of this pivot here in this short little text. A couple of lines on how hard this is, and a line on you've got it. You already have it. And the first person character is interesting too. So in English we have to at least imply tense and first, second, third person, right? Otherwise an English sentence doesn't make any sense. We don't know who's talking, you know, and what's happening. But in Chinese it's optional. You don't have to add the word for you or I or them. It's inferred and implied, and often there's these layers of reference there to figure out what's being said. So here they chose to add the first person character, which is ga in Sino-Japanese. Another time I'll break the character down, but I won't right now. And it's here. So there's an I in this, you know. There's a person. There's the person who's practicing. And even though we know from our teachings and our experience that I is not the little limited me that I tend to think I am, there's some bigger sense of I that's available here, but nevertheless, I. And so we move that into the fourth line of our translation just to make the English work. I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. And what's implied is I already can taste them, right? So it's vowing to taste them more deeply, maybe you could say, and to always be tasting them more deeply. So this fourth line in Sino-Japanese sounds like Gange Nyorai Shin Jitsugi. Gange Nyorai Shin Jitsugi. So the third and the fourth character, Nyorai, we've met that before. That was also in the Mejuku Kanongyo. And sometimes the characters are there for their literal meaning. That's the most common reason the characters are there. But other times they're there for their sound. And the sound is transliterating something from another language. So here we're trying to transliterate the Sanskrit word Tathagata, which is a name for Buddha, the one who thus comes and goes. That one's kind of a combo because the character's kind of mean comes and goes, but together it means Buddha. Together it means Nyorai. So we put those together to make Buddha. We actually have 6 words in this line. And the 6 words here are desire, explain, Buddha, true, treasure, and then correct or right. Desire, explain, Buddha, true, treasure, correct. So I vow to taste the Tathagata's words is close, but doesn't quite match up here. Here the desire is to explain the Buddha and explain the true treasure in the right way. Basically about teaching, not tasting. And sometimes actually I think it is really skillful for the translators to mess with it a little bit. And here this does seem like a skillful messing. Because if it stayed closer to the original, it would still just be me, the speaker, you know, or whoever the speaker is, saying, I'm now going to explain this to you. And there's this separation, right, between the teacher and the listeners. So ours is much more beautiful, I think, because then it includes all of us at the end, right? We all vow to taste the truth of Tathagata words. Whether whether you're the one voicing them or listening to them, it doesn't matter, right? It's a shared experience of tasting. But after you probably noticed, the word taste is not there. The word vow is not there exactly, but explain is there. So it's a little bit modified. One thing that I would not have known until recently is the character used for treasure. This is like the Dharma treasure, the three treasures, right? So this is the teachings, they're treasures. There's a whole bunch of different words for treasures. China was a materialistic culture, just like we are. And we Asianify it to make it better materialism maybe, but it's pretty materialistic culture. And so there's lots of levels of preciousness in the treasures. And the character used here is the most precious treasure possible. It's the character that was only used for the imperial treasures, which had like magical, mystical powers to them too. They weren't just valuable jewels and, gemstones and whatever they were. I don't know what they were, swords, who knows. But they had like incredible powers and stories and myths behind every one. And the emperor, right, was the child of heaven, right? So the power to interact with these sacred objects. So this was kind of a big claim that the early Buddhist translators made. It was like we're taking the imperial word, like it's a wonder didn't do something bad to them, or maybe the emperors were on board at that moment in historical time. So here we have the truth in our translation. We have the truth of the Tathagata's words, but there's something more precious implied, right? These are the imperial treasures. That's the kind of truth we're talking about. So that's our little verse. Isn't that interesting? So much there. It's not just like the warm-up for the talk, right? It's its own teaching. And this holding opposite things has been endlessly fascinating to me and hard to understand, and you can easily kind of tilt one way or the other and trivialize the one that you're less comfortable with, right? Oh, I don't need to study, it's all right here, or, yeah, you need to study. You don't know anything. Like, you don't know what you didn't know about the Lotus Sutra. What are you doing here? It's embarrassing. You shouldn't show your face, right? Like, no. It's a both and kind of thing. And that both of those are endlessly deep, and we can go deeper with. Like, even the one that sounds simple, right? The half of this equation that sounds simple. I taste this. I feel this. This is just it. This is just this. Like, that too, right? We can endlessly settle and deepen in the feeling of just thisness, right? There's no bottom to this, right? You've experienced this in meditation, I'm sure. You settle a little bit, and you're like, ah. And then you're like, oh, there's so much more to go, right? This is a life practice, right? Multiple lifetimes if we're to believe the tradition, literally. Huh? So that's what I wanted to share tonight about the opening the Dharma verse. After the verse, there's a little bridge piece, which I'll see if I can learn whether there's anything special going on there, which leads us right into the Bodhisattva vows. So we'll talk about those another time. Also a very rich thing, also written in Chinese, 4 lines of 7 characters each, in that case as well. So we'll chant that after the talk. Elizabeth.
One question about something you said. If you could elaborate. How is reality?
It's just this, It's just this. It's the just thisness of it all. And sometimes we feel that, it's hard for our minds, because our minds judge and sort, right? Our minds are like, good, bad, there's evil in the world. Well, how could this be? It's the quality of reality that's like exquisitely real and present and vibrant, even if there's things that need to get worked on, right? It's that kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? Like the yes, and we often feel it more in nature, right? Like that's why we love nature so much, because somehow the ecological systems have created a reality that comes in through our senses, where we can sense the thisness of it, and the built environment and the messy humans. It's harder, but it's also true there, right? Yeah. Thanks for asking that beautiful question. Other questions or thoughts? Have you ever been struck by anything about this particular verse, Ariel?
Can you say the words, the Sanskrit words? I'll use question.
No, it's okay.
For the last line.
So I don't have it in Sanskrit. I have it in Sino-Japanese for the Chinese. Oh yeah, yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Ariel is going to hear again the last line in the Sino-Japanese, which does include a transliteration from the Sanskrit. So that's why she mentioned Sanskrit. Yeah. Gange nyorai shin jitsu gi. Yeah. Well, by the way, everybody, I've been posting the notes to these talks on the website. Well, Annie posts them. I send them to her, and I have all the Chinese characters in the notes, so that it makes more sense looking at it. Yeah. 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 Well, good and evil. Yeah. 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 Right. Okay, I'm going to attempt to summarize what you said. That was really a rich statement. And we should probably be disciplined about the microphone in general, dude, but that's okay. Yeah, Ariel's just really wondering, expressing some wonder about the layers of language and the way meanings sort of circle around, and the way and there's like so many, and the way that conceptual frameworks have shifted through these cultural transitions, whereas Sanskrit may not have had some of the sort of duality that we have. The ways we've added duality may shine light back on what they were trying to say from the beginning. Is that a fair summary? Okay. Thanks. Well, I understand the profound, perfect Dharma, so I can do these things. Translate. Yeah, yeah. I'm becoming a translator. Yeah. And by the way, just to know, I don't actually understand Chinese or Japanese. This is all just I look stuff up and I ponder it, and so if anything I say turns out to be totally wrong, I wouldn't be surprised. But reasonably well sourced for I think. I think. So that's another duality. You have a non-Japanese Chinese speaking person trying to tell you what that stuff means, but it's what you got, so deal with it. Exactly right. Yeah. Chris reminding us how good it is just to come back to the so-called basics, which when we look at them carefully, there's nothing basic about it, right? It's just like, oh my God, and just the way, I mean, and I am quite astounded by the classical Chinese, like how much meaning can you pack into this little block of these little squiggly guys? It's unbelievable. Yeah, that it has to come pages and pages in English, with footnotes, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, well let's close there. We may be getting out of school a little early tonight because we're going off to our holiday break, right? So that's good.